Okay, so good morning. This is GSE session 3AT, presented by Dean Harrison, DWC, Docker and Dinosaurs. The session 3AT, if you could remember to give feedback at the end, that would be appreciated. And again, as normal, can you show your appreciation for the speakers and the time spent in putting these things together by donating to one of our two charities, which will also, of course, give you access into the raffle. So we're supporting the Royal Lifeboats and the Guide Dogs for the Blind. Not the blind dogs, as I said on one of the previous sessions. So without any questions, please put them in the chat. You're muted. I will unmute you at the end. Or rather, I will give you the opportunity to unmute yourself for actual questions. But if you pop them in the chat, Dean will respond as appropriate when they turn up. Okay. Without further ado, then I shall hand over to Dean. Dean, it's the wheel.
And I should point out, by absolute sheer fluke, I'm wearing my RNLI T-shirt today. I've not realised it was a charity, but there you go. Okay, so this presentation is called DWC, Docker and Dinosaurs. And us dinosaurs here on the mainframe, we're not extinct. But there is a tendency to think that we won't try anything that's not on the green screen. But we are finding that when we talk to customers, the big problem is it's such an effort to get the DWC installed to try it in the first place. It's a case of, well, are we going to put all that effort in and then find we don't like it? And the effort usually isn't anything technical. It's about being able to provision the hardware and get the relevant people to help you do it and all that kind of thing. So if you could do it yourself, well, maybe you might try it out. So DWC is now delivered in something called Docker, which is kind of a nice little containerized virtual machine type technology, if you've never heard of it before. And it'll essentially let you install a nicely, well, not even install, load a nicely pre-configured DWC on your laptop or desktop or in a little Linux box somewhere if you happen to have one. But if not, you know, something that you've got access to yourself. You don't have to go to all the departments to get going, and here's kind of how we do it. So without further ado, how to get a quick and dirty DWC up on Docker on your PC. Now, this is, of course, disclaimers here. Obviously, your employer has got to allow you to do this kind of thing, but technically it's possible. So first off, how do you get the Docker image? Well, Fix Central, hopefully you all know about Fix Central, where you can go and get the latest fixes. Again, as mainframe people, you might not know because it's mainly for the distributed stuff. Well, this part of it certainly is. And you can go to that link there. And if you stick in product group Tivoli, nice and up to date, of course, select from Tivoli IBM Workload Scheduler, select installed version 9.5.0 and select platform all. All is important because if you don't put all, you don't find the containers. So if you were to pick ZOS or anything else, you know, Windows or whatever, you won't necessarily find them. Then click continue. And then you can enter the container into fix details. Now, at the moment, the container happens to be called 9.5-IBM-IWS-console-container-FP004. So if you stick that in, you'll get straight to it. But if you just stick in the word container, it'll give you a good, reasonably small list of things to choose from, and also might inspire you to try and do some other things like get agents running under Docker on your laptop. You authenticate with your IBM ID, your IBM customer ID, and click on download now, and that will bring you the Docker image to your laptop. So then you need to install Docker. You can get the got the Docker install here, or you can Google it, find it yourself. We've basically got a Windows install or a Mac install if you're that way inclined. And I would say go for the stable channel unless there's a specific new feature needed, just to be on the safe side. It'll download as a simple setup program, run the install program, follow the prompts. There's nothing complicated in there. Log off and log back on again, just to be absolutely sure. And then you start Docker from the Windows start menu. That'll basically be, I think, Docker desktop or something like that. And you can tell if Docker is up. You'll see a little, this little black icon will be down in your Windows task monitor part. Or you can open a DOS prompt and type the command Docker version. And if that comes back and tells you something, Docker's installed. If it tells you command not understood, then you didn't quite get it right. Once you've got Docker installed, it's not too tricky to do, I promise you. Then this is where it starts to get a little bit complicated, because we've now got to prepare the container. Now think about the container as like a VMware image, if you're used to those. And you basically unzip the download into what I would call a DOS-friendly directory name. So something where you've not got anything longer than 8 characters and you've not got any spaces in it, because you're going to need to do a few things in DOS after we start this process. So I'd recommend something like c:/docker/DWC 953. And then we get something called a YML file, or you'll hear the more distributed folks talk about them as YAML files. And I would say for your first experience, go for what we call the Derby database, which is an included database that comes with Liberty, which is the platform on which the DWC lives. It's easier to configure. You don't need to put an extra DB image in there, but it does mean you don't have a reporting database, but we'll save that for later. This is about getting the DWC up on your laptop so you can connect it to your mainframe and see just how it works for you and the things you can do on it, apart from the reporting database, of course. There's lots of commented lines in there. We'll come to it on the next slide. There's lots of commented optional lines in there. You can just ignore those. Most of the defaults are okay to start with, but the stuff we need to edit, and this is what your YAML file will look, it'll look something like this. It tells you to set a password. So make it memorable and secure. In my case, mine's password, so it's very memorable, but not that secure, but whatever you want to call it. And this will be the password for WA user on your DWC. But this is only your DWC, so don't worry too much about it. This is just to test and prototype and have a good go. The console type will be Derby or Derby if you're talking to the American side of the pond. Whatever language you want to put in there. The image, now, when you get the YML file, this is what the image looks like. Later on in the process, we get a little bit of extra information that you have to type on the end of here. So we'll come to that later. But then really, these are the two things that are important to you. What your container is going to be called. I would advise, if you are going to be testing multiple versions, then you include the version in the container name. So if you wanted, this is from my 9.5 Fixpack 3 setup, and if we just downloaded Fixpack 4, this would be DWC 9.5.4. Call it whatever you like, but I would keep the version in there so you can stop and start and test different versions. For your host name, this is how your DWC is going to report to the mainframe. So I would recommend personalizing the host name with your initials or something in there, so you know it's yours. That way, when you're doing the user security, you can be sure that you're doing the user security for your DWC and not anybody else's. And the rest of this is pretty much you leave it exactly as it is. So you just edit that YML file in your temporary directory, and then open a command window, open a DOS window, navigate to the place where you stored it, so Docker DWC 953, and then issue the Docker load command pointing at the tar file. So when you drop the container in there, you'll have seen something like workload-automation-console.tar. So go into that directory and type docker space load -i space workload-automation-console-tar. And then you wait. And it'll take quite a while before you see anything happen. And then you'll start to see these loading messages come along, and you'll get a whole host of these until eventually you get loaded image, and then you get this name here. And I said before, you get a little extra bit on the end. So this extra bit on the end, you then go back into the YML file and tack that onto the end of the name. Let me just go back to the previous screen, tack that on here. It's important, as you'll see why on the next screen. It's going a bit too fast. So we've now built the container. We do that once. The only time you build a container is when you download a new one, or when you do something that completely breaks your old one, in which case you get rid of the container and start again. So from the same command prompt, you can now bring up your container. So it's basically docker-compose space up -d. And it'll look for the YML file in that directory and bring up your container. And all being well, you should see something like this and blah, 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 done. But if you see error, and especially if you see this error, the image for the service you're trying to recreate has been removed. What it actually means is that you've not put that extra little piece of information onto the end of the image in your YML file. I still don't understand why we don't ship it with that piece of information on there in the first place, but this is what you have to do. So if you have done that, then just reply no, edit the image, put the extra information onto the end in the YML file, and run the Docker Compose again. Hopefully this time it comes up. Now give it a little while, because the first time it comes up, the image actually does an auto install of the DWC inside the container and does a little bit of configuring. So first time it takes a while to come up, but after that you can access your new console directly on your PC, and only on your PC. Nobody else will be able to see it, by going to localhost :9443/console/login JSP. You'll get a logon screen, and you stick in the WA user and the password that you put in the YML file. However, again, first time in, it will show as insecure, as it's a self-signed certificate. But don't worry, it's on your PC. You're not visiting a spoofed site, so you can follow your browser's options to visit the page anyway. So on Edge, you click on details and then click on go to the web page. On Firefox, it's advanced and then accept risk and continue. Chrome, it's advanced and proceed to localhost unsafe. Once you've done that, you're there, you get the logon screen, and you can then start to play with the DWC exactly as you will. But we're not covering that today. We're just covering getting the DWC up and running. So now this next bit, come on. Try again. There we go. Right, this next bit, talking with dinosaurs. The first bit we've just shown you is how to get the DWC installed on your PC. From here onwards, this pretty much applies to any installation of the DWC. And I will tell you that some of this information is extremely difficult to glean from the manuals because it's not all in one place. So, for example, this next slide doesn't exist anywhere in the documentation as far as I know. And I'm hoping this will get most people able to connect a DWC to a mainframe nice and simply. So let's look at how a DWC instance connects to a mainframe. So in the DWC, you have these things called engines. And one of these engines you'll create per mainframe controller. And the security on this engine side will be your LDAP or local user. So the authentication on this side will not be your mainframe authentication. The DWC engine talks to the ZOS connector. And in 9.5 onwards, this is a Liberty server. Before 9.5, it's WebSphere. For people with earlier versions, I will show you the difference for WebSphere on a following slide. But essentially, it's still a connector. So when your engine says remote server name, they don't mean this or this. They actually mean what's the name of the connector. For this reason and this reason alone, because it's confusing to know what component you're actually talking to, or rather what component you're actually supposed to be talking to, I recommend, this is my top tip for DWC configuration, that you give the engine, the connector, and the controller all the same name. That way, when you're asked for a name, you give it the controller name and you know it's going to work. Because if your connector's called after the controller and your engine's called after the controller and the controller's called after your controller, all these things know what they're supposed to be talking to. They just want the name of the item. So keep the name, your controller all the way through and you'll be fine. This is the only one that can't be called after the controller because it has to be a different name from the controller. But you don't have to give this name anywhere in the configuration process, so we don't need to worry about it. But anyway, so the connector connects to the server task. The server task being a little extra piece of communication that you can bring up with a controller. Server tasks can be used for DWC connections, they can be used for PIF programs, they can be used for users connecting through ISPF. My recommendation is that you have one server task exclusive to the process of DWC connections, because depending on how you do the authentication, you might find yourself bouncing this task from time to time. So just keep them separate. It gives you a better availability overall. Then the server task connects directly with the subsystem name to the controller. And so on this side, the authentication is your Windows or Linux setup. On this side, the security is RACF, and it's this component here that does the translation. And we'll come on to how it does that on a following slide. So things to think about: the DWC instance must be the same version or greater than your controller. So if this is a 9.5 DWC, this can be a 9.5 or a 9.3 controller. If this were a 9.4 DWC, I wouldn't recommend trying to connect it to a 9.5 controller. It might work, but we don't guarantee it. So the support arrangement is this must be the same or higher than the controller. DWC can be on Linux, Unix, Windows. We can now install it on the mainframe because you can install Z-Liberty on the mainframe now. And of course, it can be containerized, as we've seen on this presentation. Also, when you are connecting from the connector to the server task, it asks for a host name or IP. I would recommend using a DNS name, not a direct IP, because this reduces issues with certificates and security later. You can make it work with an IP address, but DNS names are better. I also recommend that the IP address you use here is a dynamic Viper address, so that when you move the controller from one LPAR to another for your high availability configuration, the server goes with it and the IP address goes with it. That way your DWC will never lose sight of your controller. So make sure you have a server task. Surprisingly, in this day and age, not everybody does. If you have a controller on a single LPAR and you're only logging onto ISPF through the same LPAR, you don't actually need one. It's only when you start to connect from another LPAR or from the big wide world that you really need one. And essentially, server task, it's created by EQQ jobs for you. It'll create a member called EQQ Ser, which contains the JCL, and it'll create some default parameters, EQQ Ser P. The important stuff in there is the subsystem name. That must be the name of your controller. Remember, I said to use the same name throughout. You do occasionally see people who put the name of the server in there. The server task will come up, but it will not work if you've got the server name for the subsystem. This should be the host name, hopefully your dynamic Viper address, and this will be the port number. The default port number is 425, but if you are working with multiple controllers, I would recommend a unique port number for each. So should they have a land on the same LPAR, you haven't got a clash of ports. I think that's it. Oh, and the server names can actually be, whilst the controller can only be 4 characters, server names can be a full 8 characters. So you could, for example, call your server for the DWC, INDC DWC. You could have another one for the PIF and call it INDC PIF, and another one for ISPF, call it INDC ISPF. So you can give them all nice names that make sense to you later on. If you put the server in the OPC Ops server keyword, whenever you bring your controller up or down, the server will go up and down with it. And also, if you're working with hot standby controllers, whenever your controller takes over, it will bring the server task up automatically for you as well. So recommended, put it in the servers keyword in your OPC Ops statement. Security mapping. Right, there are 2 ways to map security. Now, we mentioned that on the DWC side, the username you log onto the DWC will either be user at host name, so whatever the host is on that machine. It could be a local user on that machine or a local DWC user, actually in the DWC definition, or you can use LDAP or some other form of enterprise user management system, in which case the user will be user at and whatever the domain is. So whether it's your Windows domain or whatever. We do support quite a lot of different single sign-on type systems. So that's how you're going to log on to the DWC. But how does that authenticate on the mainframe? Because of course these user IDs don't exist on the mainframe. So if you look in your servops statement, you should see that there's a keyword set up for you called user map, and there's a member name. And in that member name, you can put user, and here we've got the user ID at domain name and what RACF user that maps to. So you can map each user ID as they come into any particular RACF user. Obviously, this member doesn't contain any passwords, but I would still make this a very secure member so that TWS itself can read it and only administrators can read it. So you don't get any idea of what users have got access to TWS. There's also a nice little trick that's not widely known in the user map, that if you've got a lot of numeric users, shall we say, out in your LDAP domain, you could have USR asterisk in the IT domain will map to RACF user, whatever character there, and an ampersand. And anything, so if that's user 001, that will map to U001 over here, and so on. It gives you if you've got just numbers, it gives you a generic way of mapping one user ID to the other. Just be aware that your RACF user is restricted to 7 characters, whereas this might not. So bear that in mind when you're deciding whether to do this trick. So that's one way to do it, and that's the easiest way. And being as we're talking quick and dirty, that's probably the way you'll do it for getting your first DWC up and running. But there's also a TME admin class, and I do believe we've created a brand new class for this in the latest version that isn't called TME admin, but I can't remember what it's called. But TME admin still works. And basically, if that class isn't already in your system, you'll define it in the class descriptor table, give it this kind of information, and then I can't see this very well on my screen because it's gone like a nice, unfortunate, turned it into a link. But you basically are defined TME admin, and in this case, I've got dean.harrison@wa.console, and that translates to Dean H on RACF. So it's the same kind of thing. It's inbound user ID, RACF user ID. Same sort of thing as you do up here. I don't believe you can do this kind of mapping in TME admin, only the blow by blow method here. So the next bit, we're working our way backwards across that diagram, if you remember, the ZOS or ZOS connector. What this does is it maps an engine to a server task. It's the bit that links the two pieces of information together. Now, in the Liberty configuration, so from 9.5 onwards, it lives in the DWC home directory, which I did put on this. There we go. Where's it gone? There we go. Home WA user, WA data. There it is. Yeah, can't see for looking. It's in the DWC home directory, and it's in it's a horrible long directory name, but you will get used to it. /usr/server/DWC server/config drop-ins. This directory here is where all the configuration for Liberty takes place. In here, there's a directory called templates, and this contains the files that you need to copy and edit. And once you've edited it, you copy the edited result into the override directory. So we've got config drop-ins templates, config drop-ins override. And once you've done that, the connector is live. There's nothing else you need to do. It happens straight away. And this note here, the DWC home is home WA user WA data. So whatever your primary user is called, it's in the home directory and then WA data below it. So that means this directory is actually /home/WA user/WA data /USR/servers/DWC server/config drop-ins, which is a bit of a mouthful. So if you're a little bit Linux friendly, you can actually create yourself a nice little shortcut. If you cd into the home WA user and then do this command ln-s creates what's called a symbolic link, and we basically create a symbolic link to WA data /user/server/DWC server/config drop-ins to config. So basically what happens is we have now a new directory called home WA user config, which maps to home WA user, WA data, user servers. It's just a quick way to get there. And you will find when you're starting to play with this and wanting to configure it more, that you will find that shortcut very, very useful, just to go straight to the config without having to type all that in every time. I'm sure if you're an experienced Linux user, you'll be a lot happier in different ways of doing that. But that's my dinosaur way of doing it. So we found the template. we need to create a new ZOS connector. So we copy the connector's called connection factory.xml. We copy it from the templates folder. It's actually a Z connectors folder under templates. And we connect it, we copy it to a temporary location. And I'll show you how to do that on the next screen. We edit the temporary copy with the values of your ICWS system. So this is what the connector looks like. So we've got connection factory ID equals, and this is the name of the connector. And remember I said always use the controller name. Well, that's your controller name stuck there. This is also the name of the connector. So you stick the same name in there. And then for host name, well, that's your DNS name for your dynamic Viper address, and that's the port number. So that information there is what we saw on the previous slide. Once you've done that, you can copy that version into the config drop-ins override library. And again, it's gone live. Now, if you happen to need two controllers, so you want to talk to a prod and a dev one, then just repeat this little block of code inside the server tag and put your other controller names in there. So maybe INPC for production, and the production host name, and the production port. The key thing is those values there should match what you've got in the server task. And as long as that happens, again, you should be okay. So from 9.5 onwards, in Docker, so from the DOS prompt, you open the Docker command line for your container, and you do it like this: docker exec /it, and then that's the name of your container. So it's important that's something simple and something you remember, space bash. Now this puts you in a Linux shell, so I'm afraid you do need some basic Linux skills, but not much. Copy the template to /tmp. So again, it's copy, CP for copy, and that's that whole long directory name complete with the templates and whatever. /temp, copied away to /temp. Then in /temp, you edit it with something like vi. You might need to get somebody to tell you that, to show you how to do that, but you know, look it up on Google, it'll get you there. It's not too tricky. Make it look, excuse me, like this on here. Just fill in those information. There aren't many vi commands you need to know. Basically, you need to know either insert and replace, which is Control I and Control R, I think, something like that, or I and R. And then when you've saved it on vi, copy the config file into the overrides library. So again, CP, blah, 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 connection factory to config drop-ins overrides. And that's it, your connector's live. If you're before 9.5, so if you're on a WebSphere version, obviously you won't be doing the Docker stuff, but WebSphere has a directory called WASTools, and in there you can do /create ZOS engine.sh, or it's .bat on Windows, so that's your Linux, Unix, that's your Windows, and it'll look something like this. Again, connector name, host name, and the port number. There's some other commands in there like list ZOS engine, display engine, update engine, lets you do these same sort of things, but you do them as command line rather than a text file editor. To bring the new connector into use, again, in this same directory, this WASTools directory, /stop_was followed by /start was, and that will stop and start was for you, giving you the connectors going live. But that's only if you're using one of the old WebSphere versions. Final bit, almost. Creating an engine. So now we've got the controller up, we've got a server talking to the controller. You can test your server, by the way, by connecting to it from ISPF. So even though we said make it specifically for the DWC, you can do it, go into 0.1 in ISPF, type in that DNS name and that port number, and if you can connect through, you know your server's working okay. ZOS Connector, we've just seen that on the previous thing. It's basically editing that template file, copying it into overrides, and now we get to the engine stage. Basically, you go into DWC administration, manage engines, new. And then where it says engine name, so here, again, use the controller name. Where it says host name, the host name is actually the host name of the connector. So it's the same machine. It's where you are now on your laptop, if you've done it with Docker, or if you've just installed the DWC on a big Linux server, you will have installed the connector on the same machine. So again, it's still localhost. Port number for 9.5 onwards, this is the host.bootstrap.port.sec port, which normally is that. If you're not sure what it is, or it doesn't appear to work, then again, this config drop-ins directory is crucial for you. In the override directory, there is a file called port variables.xml, and you can look in there to see what the host.bootstrap.port.sec entry is if this isn't working for you, if 19402 doesn't work. So that's where you go to find out. Name of the connector, again, I recommend using the controller name all the way through, so you're always going to be right. I say that is my top tip. Make sure you use the controller name throughout, and you cannot go wrong on this. Well, not on that part anyway. And then credentials here, you're going to put the user and password of the user ID that you log on to the DWC with. There is a way, and I'm not a DWC admin expert, you can do single sign-on and it will do a pass straight through. But in this case, at least to get it working, you put your user ID and your password in here, and then click test connection, and fingers crossed, everything works for you. Now, in real life, I would say never share. There's a button here to share credentials. I would say never, ever share credentials, because what that means is anybody that logs on to this particular DWC, be it your personal one or be it one that's actually out there as a production one, if you've shared credentials, no matter what the user's logged on with, it will declare itself to the mainframe as the credentials here, which means everybody will get the same RACF user ID. So don't do that if you're sharing this connection with anybody else. Like I say, test connection, hopefully it works. If it doesn't work, these are, come on, move. Here we go. If it doesn't work, these are the likely things, the most likely things to have gone wrong. So if you see this, AWS JC005E, hostname or port incorrect, that basically means your host name should be localhost and port to 19402. If these haven't worked, then go and look in the port variables file to find out what the exact port is. Equally, if localhost isn't working, then, well, that means probably your connector's not been defined properly. Maybe you've not got it in the overrides library. So check, find out why it's not finding that connector for you. This message, AWS JZC093E, incorrect remote server name. This is basically the name of your connector, which if you followed my advice and use the name of the controller throughout, you won't get this bit wrong either. Either of these error messages, invalid username or password, this are the credentials on logging onto the DWC. So those two credential fields that we had in the engine, they need to be a valid user and password for the DWC. This one, connection refused. Well, you need to check that the host name that you're talking to actually can be pinged and that the controller and server is actually up. So this could be firewall stuff to fix it, or it could be that the controller's just not. This one, EQQX110E, I have seen this a few times, and this is where I mentioned that sometimes when people define the server task, they put the server name in the subsys keyword instead of the controller name. But basically, what this is complaining about is it's saying that the name in the subsys keyword in the server task isn't a valid subsystem. So make sure that is pointing to your controller. And then finally, user ID missing. That means that the user that you've authenticated with on the DWC is not in the user map on the server task. Now, it's rather nice that when you do have a failed connection, you can go and look in the log of the server task and it will tell you who tried to connect. So you can see the user and host name and effectively cut and paste those into a user map to point it at the right rack FID. And in theory, they're kind of all the problems you're likely to get. Probably the most, this is going to be the most problematic area to resolve, because all of these are just simple corrections. So this could be anything down to firewall problems, certificate issues, and connection issues. I can't really help you with those. You'll have to get your own network people to help sort those out. But these are the other fairly common problems. I would have liked to at this point have shown you a live DWC, but unfortunately this morning my VPN isn't working, so I can't get mine to connect. So as I suspected, this area here is the cause of problem for me on my system. So that's how you install one in the in Docker, and how you connect to the mainframe. Any questions?
At this point, I can give you all the power to unmute yourselves. You have that power. If you have any questions for Dean on this or related areas, you may do that now.
Stunned silence.
Yep. There are still things in there I don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I would say to anybody is, thinking of doing this diagram here is the most important thing, because it shows you which component is talking to which. Because when you're trying to debug why the thing isn't talking, come back to this diagram and then you'll know, okay, so this isn't talking to that, or this isn't talking to that, or whatever. And then again, coming back to the final slide, trust me, these are the very most common error messages that you get. And they're normally the very simple things like, I've not got the right port number, or I didn't put the right name in for the connector, or the credentials weren't right. And they're all, once you know what the message really means, this bit here tells you where you go and fix it. So,
excellent.
With that, there you go. And back to Anna.
Please do fill in your session feedback. This session was 380. I don't go.
Yeah, it's 380.
Yes, in my notes it's 380. Way to throw me there, Dean.
Well, you might want to give me feedback on my next session at the same time. That's right. That's the right one.
380. Okay. So please do your feedback. Just to remind you that one of the questions about session length, the right answer is 5 and not 9. Please be careful when you read the question. I shall now lead the appreciation for our esteemed speaker, Dean.
There you go.
And thank you, Dean. And again, remember to also, you can show your appreciation for the time and effort for creating and giving this presentation by supporting the GSE charities.
Indeed. I say, go on, go RLNI. RNI. It's not easy to say at this time in the morning. RNI. Yeah. Yeah.
You're a tongue twister. So, oh yes, you've got some applause there as well. Done the proper way, the way that I said it has to do. If you want to become a member of the GSC, there are certain things that are that gives you. For example, being able to download the recordings from these sessions is only available to GSC member. So if your company is a member of the GSE, you'll be able to download these recordings in a couple of weeks. The other thing is that we now have individual membership of GSE. So if your company isn't a member, you may be a member yourself. Which will also give you obviously the benefits of coming to the GSE conference, which we hope will be live next year, and other great things like a t-shirt on your way in. Great, they are great events. So if you want to attend next year, you know, become a GSE member and get a free place. Okay. All right. So thank you very much. And I can leave the session open if you want to chat amongst yourselves about anything IZWS related. Please go ahead and use the time.
Yeah. Or Anna, you said there was something in there you didn't quite follow. What bit didn't you follow?
Oh, I don't follow anything that says tar.
Okay, right. Just think zip.
Just think zip. Yeah, I know.
That's all it is. Again, the only just to I deliberately called this DWC Docker and Dinosaurs. This is the only part that you really need what I would say non-mainframey type skills is manipulating that connector file. And I say just get a little, you know, Google Vi and get a little YouTube video or whatever. I always liken it to trying to do typing with boxing gloves on, in that it's very easy to just wipe out all sections of your text, but you can always quit without saving. But yeah, this is the only part in it that really needs anything that you can't just follow script by script. Because if I tried to turn this into a tutorial for Vi, then you would need 2 sessions to try and describe all the things you could do in Vi with it.
Oh,
but,
that sounds like something for next year then.
maybe we add that in. But I did originally try to do this because you can copy from the one thing to understand here is in Docker, your DWC is sat in a container, which is like a little virtual machine sat on your laptop. And this command here, this docker exec itwa DWC bash, puts you into the command line of that container. But there are commands that will let you copy a file from inside the container to your Windows machine. And I thought, oh, that's easy. We'll copy it out, edit it in Windows and copy it back. But then I found that Windows and Linux don't use the same line feed and end of line markers. When you eventually reopened it back inside Docker, it looked a mess.
Well, that's a good tip. Don't do that.
Yeah, it's a good tip. Don't do that. Eventually, I will find somebody that can tell me maybe there's an editor out there on Windows that you can use and actually edit it WYSIWYG and then copy it back into Docker. But I don't know what that is yet. When I find it, we'll put it into a new version of this presentation. But this is really the only time you need to drop into Linux land. And like I say, it's a copy command to copy the file, and I've just noticed that's wrong, so I shall correct that before I put this back up on the GSE server. There is a version already there now. And then there's a bit of vi edited here, and then there's a copy again. So you don't need a lot of commands, but a little bit's useful. And it's not that dissimilar from DOS, to be fair. But yeah, you say, where is it? Tar file. Yeah, I remember where it mentioned the tar file. There. That is the only time you talk to the tar file.
Okay.
That's it. You don't touch it, you don't unzip it or untarball it or whatever it is the Linux term is for it. It's just a file that you point a command at. So you don't really need to care it's a tar file. It's just a file. So
I will get around to trying it.
Yeah.
But you know, as you know, I'm one of the oldest dinosaurs around. So
well, yeah, well, that's just why I thought this might be a decent presentation to do, because a lot of people are scared of it. And in actual fact, once you, I think the hardest part of this is going to be configuring that connector. And I had hoped to find a more Windows friendly way, because I know, you know, us old folks prefer Windows editing to try and command line editing any day. But you know,
technically we prefer ISPF editing.
well, yeah. But essentially, this is really this presentation. Certainly, getting Docker installed and getting the container going. It's just a matter of following instructions and typing these bits in these files. There's not a lot to it. The hardest part for somebody without Linux skills is configuring that connector. So there you go. Anything else while we're in here? Has everybody run away?
No, there's still a lot of people listening.
Oh, good. Well, I thought if I ask you, you know, it might be a thing we can do to make it easier. But yeah, it's relatively easy to do, and I must admit, when I did it, I managed to get it to work the first time. Sorry, no, I got it to work the second time, because the first time I got this error here. And then I realized that the image name actually told you what the image name was here, and it wasn't the same. Like I say, I don't know why we do that. I don't know why we deliver it without that, because that number will, if for FixPack 3, if you download FixPack 3, it will always be that number that comes out, because it's the date that the image was built, as I believe.
Oh yeah, 2020.
Because this was the December FixPack.
It is, yeah, and the time 1337.
Yeah. So that's what it is. That never, you know, for this container, it must be that the process of building the containers actually puts this in the, so somehow that first bit gets put in the YML file to build the container, and then that kind of gets put in by the process. But it just strikes me as a little bit odd. It could be better, but as long as you know that it's doing that, and as long as you know that, oops, excuse me, this error message means that you've missed that little bit off the end of the image, it's not a problem. Because that was the thing, when I saw that it's been removed, it's like, who removed it? I've only just installed it. It's my machine, nobody else could have moved it. But yeah, hopefully you go through this, the error messages you see will be the ones that predicted. And the problem area will more than likely be either editing that connector file or, like I say, connection problems. Connection problems, no matter what software you're talking about, TCP/IP connection, firewalls, certificates, it's a dark art. And you need the right people on hand to be able to deal with that. So there you go.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And we'll see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock.
Yeah, tomorrow 9 o'clock for lockdown, if you haven't had enough of lockdown already. But this is a different kind of lockdown. It's all about Racket.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. And hopefully see most of you again during the day. And see you do it again tomorrow at least.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.